Okay. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode. Tonight's episode is a very important one for me. I find that it is the most important topic that a living human being can speak about. One of the most important topics. And so, let me begin. Just a second, guys. I'm just setting up the music as I. Where am I? Okay, there we go. The title of tonight's episode is A Civilization in Transit. And so the subtitle I've written about a new evolutionary responsibility. To kind of show the viewers how I'm approaching this notion is that I got to speak about a concept I personally acknowledge, and it's something I've developed. It's a way of acknowledging the intelligence of the being. And so I'm going to start off like this by saying that when we look at the development of a civilization is like a child. It is a child that in some sense requires to be raised, and then as it is raised, it requires to become self-sufficient. It needs to maintain itself. The concept that I want to, that's like the point of this, is that I speak about something like when I see human beings, I don't acknowledge any other position. Like you can come here and tell me you're a scientist, you're an engineer, you're a yogi, you're whatever, but I only see human beings, at least their intelligence, as they're either advanced communicators or pilots of consciousness. I see all human beings. And so the reason I use these terms, first of all, the advanced communicator is just the simple notion that you're an advanced communication of your universal sector. So communication is actually the inspiration of your evolutionary progress. It is the phase that we're in now. I'll get more into that in a little bit. The pilots of consciousness. This is pretty much to me it is one of the most beautiful ideas my mind has ever considered, because I remember looking at sort of the Upanishads and Vedic texts, and I wondered who wrote these books. And then the way it's communicated is that these were the seers of thought. And so, for example, the Mahabharata and the Puranas were written by Rishi Vyasa, and the Bhagavad Gita. And so Rishi Vyasa to me was a person who was piloting his plane of existence through a collective intelligence. And so the pilot of consciousness is a human being who's navigating their whole plane of existence. That means I'm like, okay, we've lived enough as just human embodiments moving around. What is the sophistication? What is the true intelligence of the moment? How far can our minds open beyond what they believe, beyond what they have conceived, beyond what they have accepted? So the pilot of consciousness is this notion that the human being, or you can navigate your intelligence and existence as the whole moment of being. So again, the pilot of consciousness navigates as the whole plane of existence. So I'm kind of using a metaphoric kind of relationship there, where it's as if a pilot is in a plane. But when I say plane, it's not just like an airplane in the sky. I'm saying the plane is the plane of existence. It is the world. So you're navigating your attention in this world. Now, when many individuals which evolve into a sort of develop into through sophisticated tribal relationships into a civilization. Now the civilization is in a sort of transit. What that means is that the attention of the human beings alive now is in a transition point because we have reached the end of a certain technology, an inner technology. And so it is kind of, I mean, I feel I'm a bit, it may come across right now what I'm saying a bit far-fetched, but I feel, some part of me feels this, that eventually the educational system will have to acknowledge an apocalypse. This apocalypse is not like a chaotic thing where the educational system's all breaking up and we're suddenly seeing, it's kind of like where the restriction on knowledge can no longer be known. We right now, we're creatures, the human civilization is living in conditions. You see, you need, for example, food, water, sleep, a place to stay, and all these are conditions. We have a conditional collective existence. Even in society, you have to acknowledge the rules of society. You have to acknowledge the conditions of the world in order to step into those structures and mechanisms of social activity or whatnot. So, in some sense, the transit of a civilization is the suggestion of the behavior of the individuals in the civilization, and it is a sort of shift of the simpler particle, as if, like, imagine somebody made something very simple. I'll get, like, this is a ridiculous example, but this comes to my mind. Imagine right now, imagine like there's some kid in the world who makes the R2D2 robot with Lego. Okay. And imagine that kid makes the R2D2 robot with Lego, but suddenly from a Lego kind of structure, it suddenly, imagine, just playfully, I'm saying this is a thought experiment, it becomes R2D2, the actual robot. So then the Lego, the pieces of the Lego, the simplest particles of the design shift, they change. It's kind of, believe it or not, I mean, that's a ridiculous metaphor, what I said. But a simpler metaphor would be like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And when the caterpillar enters the cocoon and when it enters a sort of metamorphosis process, the cells of the butterfly, the cells of the caterpillar are dying. It's as if one reality is stopping. So it's not just people who live, realities live and die too. And this is a very important idea to acknowledge, that it's not just people who die. The worlds their eyes keep and maintain also perish. And when the world changes quicker than your body, in some sense, you feel you have a mind. Okay, I gotta rephrase that because it's a very complex dynamic, because when we look at life, pretty much the relationship of existence appears as a self in a world. So if you're in the Western part of the world and you have no introduction to Eastern mysticism or any sort of mysticism or practices of awareness to self, you're going to see that it's as if design is the ruler of your mind. Do you know how long it's probably going to take the species? 200 years for the average citizen to not be occupied by design. That means their sensory data is not just taking shape based on their objective existence. What that means is the thoughts you have, you will move beyond. You will move beyond in a way where the world takes the shape of your eyes. There comes always a transformation point. For me, that's what I notice from the wisdom traditions and pretty much the sayings of certain sages and saints back in the day. That for them, what became divine was a moment that was never experienced before. It was pretty much such a new experience that the previous reality could not interpret. So what that means is, imagine somebody from the future comes and shows the technology to someone, and that guy's like, oh my God, this is a miracle. I can't believe this exists, or something like that. But we see that it is a miracle to us, but it is back then. It's like for the time traveler who came from the future, it's like pretty normal something, you know. So the world begins to change, and this is the unique thing. I don't think on this planet there has ever been minds as sophisticated as human beings, embodied minds, that could consciously change with the world. A lot of nature doesn't realize it's here. We as human beings have a very sophisticated way of realizing we're here. This is our ability. This is a sort of permission of it's an authorization for existential presence. You know, I find every human being, just like how the planet has an axis, I find every person's sense of self has a sort of axis of value, and its tilt is in regards to how much of who they consider is known or unknown. So when the individuals in a civilization, imagine 8 billion people, we all thought we knew what's going on, we would see we have solidified our thoughts into our bodies. And that is, it's too soon in some sense. Meister Eckhart has this quote where he says, he's a Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart, from like 1,000 years ago. He says, the same eyes that I see God are the same eyes that God sees me. And what he means is that he has recognized his awareness beyond the attributes of his individual activity. Because you see, right now you feel you are a person and you have a certain awareness to the world, a sort of narrow range of all that you have seen in a world so big. And from that narrow range of accessible data and awareness, you are sculpting yourself in every moment. And so there is, of course, the dimension of free will. I remember I asked someone who I considered, someone who I had, someone who I had met in India, who I felt they had a sort of clarity. And I asked this person, does free will exist? And it was very interesting because that person's opinion, he was, of course, he had Acharya in front of his name. And this man opened my eyes to something very interesting, that it is as if nature's greater mind that is trying to become the identity of the individual, as if the individual will get bored of just being a person. And therefore, as it pursues progress, eventually its mind is seeking the greatest individual thing. That means right now, like imagine the person's like, what can I do that's the greatest thing just for me? At the peak of individual evolution, there will suddenly be a realization of the collective. And this realization of the collective, it is kind of like how Rabindranath Tagore, this Indian polymath who even Einstein visited him, Rabindranath Tagore has this saying where he says, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. And that's the thing, like that sentence is I don't know how many people's eyes will find it the way I do, but that sentence is suggesting that the consciousness was evoked in this world, first considering the purposes of life to just be in the self. That means it's as if the child had not evolved enough to a point to recognize conditions outside of the condition it is in. This is in some sense the clarity that maturity brings in this lifetime. The clarity of maturity is the witnessing of the various ways the world moves regardless of how you expect it. It's an acceptance of nature before life and death are values to an individual or a collective mindset. Because it's a sort of paradoxical situation where we have individual free will, but the whole cosmos is occurring as one moment. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Just like we pour, just like how water from a valve pours into a cup, a container. Similarly, I find that sensory data is pouring into a subjective container, which is the sense of self. It is the I thought. It is the egoic construct. It is how the attention is choosing to be a subtler form. That's your ego. And that subtler form is preserved through language. And this is why I say anybody who's interested in spirituality, don't waste your time. You must first study your relationship with language. You must become Noam Chomsky is I consider him to have a man with mystical depth because he has studied language. He has seen how language is in some sense a jacket we're wearing, which we think it is our skin. Okay. So imagine you're wearing a jacket and you think that's your skin. So your friend's going to come to you. It's like, yo, man, what are you saying? That's a jacket you're wearing. So similarly, the egoic construct, the I thought, is something that the attention is holding in the moment. And it is coloring it in with not just the past and the imagination, but the presence of the moment. That means if I ask you if there was data from the past and there was data from the future and there was data from the present, imagine there was a kind of Moses' baby situation where you have to choose to walk towards one of these. What sort of data would be more impressive to you? Would you want to know the secrets of the past? Would you want to know the secrets of the future? Or would you want to know the secrets of the present? The reason I'm saying this is because the present is the most powerful position because the present evokes a sort of philosophical kind of consideration that the past and future are momentary generations. This means that rather than us memorizing knowledge, we have to adapt to change. That's what Darwin understood. If Darwin was alive right now, Charles Darwin, and he saw the educational system, I'm sure he'd shout. He'd go and shout at someone. Because the point of evolution was an adjustment to change, but our knowledges and languages haven't changed for a while. So instead of us adjusting to the nature of our direct experiences, we're all adjusting to sort of conceptual agreements that we think the collective wants. It's one of those things where there is a truth here, but it's being generated by illusions. It's as if like there's this structure called truth, but its foundations are illusion. And so this is the fascinating thing about this life, that if you suddenly had no TV, no computer, nothing, it would still go on changing. You see, no person can be stressed and depressed forever. That is kind of like the lesson we get from sleep. It's like you can have the worst day and sleep and wake up and be like, okay, there was a sort of, it's a new day. Plato says time is the moving image of eternity. What he means is that time is the projection of a present intelligence. Do you know how fascinating it is if the concept of time doesn't exist? Do you know how suddenly many aspects of society will suddenly be hollow? And they would be hollow because they're going to, we as a species will soon realize, regardless of how much. This is why I say education has to be free all over the planet. You know why? Not just because students don't need to pay loans. Education has to be free because education is the sophisticated mouth noises of advanced creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. For a scientist to find like there's some scientists who are attempting to find a formula that kind of explains all of reality, and I'm like, like, who dares? Who dares contain the vastness of the truth of this existence in language, in just a sentence? You know, what's funny? A sentence is a death sentence for a mind if the sentence is believed, or is it believed. So I could say it even like this, more structure the sentence statement like this. I could say that a belief is a death sentence for the mind. There's certain sages who have said a habit is the decay of the mind. And if we have the same habit of our attention constantly just animating itself energetically and waking up in the same structures, you will get bored. It's like it's like no human being wears the same shirt for the whole life. Eventually, they grow out of it. Similarly, the human being's direct experience and attention expands beyond the limits of their conception. This is why suddenly when you have a new experience, your thoughts are different because new data has entered the sphere of the endless awareness. I can, I think my life could be a good example of this. I was raised in Iran till the age of 7. Then I was raised in Canada. And so, in whatever country a person finds themselves in, they are eventually exposed to a cultural program. This cultural program sets into motion their morality because the child that trusts its parents and its environment will eventually try to relate to the environment. That means if you notice, whenever you love something or you like something, you try to be like it, you know? And so it's strange. I've noticed this even in myself, especially like a good example would be the devotion of a son to his father, you know like as if a son sees himself in the image of his father, you know and we can say that people who loved their dads eventually in their minds loved God. And it's all about trust. That's what a family is. That means I'm pretty sure that when I don't know, I don't actually know the theory of the atom. How I don't know. I can't. I mean, I heard the name, but I can't remember the name of the person who, in some sense, considered atomic structure. I mean, of course, I think Plato conceived the universe as an element. I think it was Plato. It could have been Plato. I'm not sure, but pretty much the early life wasn't always seen as particles, okay? This is why science is fascinating, because you got to take into consideration history. When they teach science without the fascination of the historical developments, it's as if children will not be inspired to go learn science because they can't relate it to the story that they're telling themselves every day. History is pretty much his story. History is it's a dictionary of events. That's pretty much what history is. And the beautiful thing about language, you see, the objective reality doesn't have a glitch in the system. What does that mean? That means when you look at nature, it works with an alignment and rhythm where you're like, wow, nature is much smarter than the person, yeah, than the thought of the person. That means a person who navigates as a collective being has a different intelligence accessible than a person who navigates as an individual being. And not just Western society, but the global community, it's as if we're reaching the edge of idol worship. You know, the reasons I find, and of course I shouldn't say this because it is a tragedy, but we find certain celebrities using a bridge in the wrong way. And the reason is because the idolization of the self will lead to the death of the self. That means just like how people worshipped idols, and suddenly, some people came and broke those idols. It's like, what are you doing worshipping rocks and wood, and feathers? Like, what are you doing, man? And eventually man awoke. His attention no longer needed to just linger on objective phenomena. But here's the thing. We have not evolved past the subjective phenomena. We have, but we don't acknowledge it in the mainstream. It's as if, just like how a political system cannot adjust to the citizens. So what that means is when you look at politics, you pretty much are seeing like heritage. You're pretty much seeing the political system being like this kind of structure that's built and modified through time as various architects have entered it. For me, politicians are architects of the movement of societies in history. Okay, and to be a politician is something where in today's world it's a battle for dollars. It's as if it's like money has become the most important resource. The most important resource, the only way out into a greater evolutionary kind of state for our civilization is to revalue life by realizing the individual depends on the collective. Your individual physical body right now depends on the earth to exist. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is that eventually people will come to this recognition that after they have lived a lifetime for themselves, they will realize their self is alive to be with others. That's the unique thing. That's the unique thing. It's there is a design here, guys, and language is a design where the free will has influenced it, but objective reality is a design prior to the free will. That means this is why for me ideology, it's like since childhood I find my issue with just learning in general was that it was trying to be fed to me. Knowledge should not be force fed to children. If knowledge was food, the educational system is just forcing food into children's mouths and they have to eat it. That means the child is not inspired to know about the world based on their authentic excitement, but they're kind of being pushed to know about the world based on a sort of disinterest. Now, the child doesn't know better, so it has to be pushed. It's like, you can't be, you gotta, you have to, there needs to be discipline and there needs to be a certain structure, but there also needs to be the freedom of the creative movement. So if there's a child in class that gets a new idea on the subject, um, how would I say it? I find there should come a time where the databases of all universities should be connected and accessible to everyone. I feel children should be given the hardest problems, the hardest global and cultural and social problems. When a child begins thinking about society in an early age, it will become conscious of society. Because whatever you authentically want to know, the data suddenly appears. This is the value of honesty. Honesty shifts the texture of the sensory simulation. And the sensory is in the unknown. So if somebody came up to like Mr. Within, it's like, yo, Mr. Within, what is the soul? I'll be like, it's unknown. It's like the X factor in the equation, and it has to be. It cannot be given too many stories. I mean, I speak about it because I want to kind of. It's like there's nothing to fear, and it's like if we're all atoms, if we're all just objective phenomena that and the identity and the personality and consciousness is a sort of hallucination of matter, you know, a sort of strange chemical reaction that is a sort of dream of itself. So this, if we consider it that way, then it's like atoms can't fear atoms. Do you know? It all is the civilization's direction is just it just depends on this simple view. How much does the living deciders of that world care for efficiency? That's it. And the individual's efficiency is the collective's efficiency. A very profound example of this would be how I remember I was watching this documentary where in this documentary there was a suggestion that the Medici family, they were like the world's early, the Europe's kind of early bankers in Italy or that region. And so the Medici, it's as if like it's kind of like we had enlightened aristocrats. Not all aristocrats are like Ebenezer Scrooge or that guy from The Simpsons. It's like you know, I'm telling you, reality is not just blind and it's not just always seeing. It's a changing thing. It's a dance. If when you realize you gotta dance with your world, you cannot have any interpretations on it. It's like a dancer kind of having an opinion before he or she has performed. It's like, what do you have an opinion on? It's like life has to be lived. And as it is honestly lived, the subjective simulations simplify to the direct experience. The direct experience finds itself separate. So when René Descartes, this French philosopher, spoke, oh man, I'm bringing too many stories at once. Let me finish the Medici idea. The Medici family, these bankers, they had this vision that it was as if like in order to evolve society, they had to invest in it, you know? And so it's as if right now, the economical system wants to prey upon people's kind of, let's say, financial positions. Okay, the economical system is jungle-like right now. Okay, however, as one begins to redesign society to its greatest potential, suddenly beauty enters. When beauty enters, beauty is an acceptance of an unknown position. When you look at something beautiful, there is a sort of mystery in the background. Because if that mystery wasn't there, it'd be the same old thing, you know? The Medici family started making the streets of that area